America welcomes the action and support of any nation willing to do the hard but vital work in eradicating the violent ideologies that have caused so much needless bloodshed and killing here and all over the world. We are willing to work together. I believe that a new level of partnership is possible and will happen, one that will bring greater safety to this region, greater security to the United States, and greater prosperity to the world. This includes a renewed effort at peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And I thank the Prime Minister for his commitment to pursuing the peace process. He's working very hard at it. It's not easy. I've heard it's one of the toughest deals of all. But I have a feeling that we're going to get there eventually. I hope. I'm committed to working with Israel and the Palestinians to reach an agreement. But any agreement cannot be imposed by the United States or by any other nation. The Palestinians and Israelis must work together to reach an agreement that allows both peoples to live, worship, and thrive and prosper in peace.
President Trump affirming his commitment to reaching a lasting peace agreement between the Israelis and Palestinians, this during a joint statement with Palestinian President Abbas, while also pressing the Palestinian leader to combat and condemn terrorism in the Middle East. Joining me now is Ken Abramovich and Arash Aramesh. Arash, let me start with you. A lot of people, listen, presidents have sought to try to find a way to find a solution, or at least aid in a solution, for the last 40 years, maybe longer here in America. Do you feel it's even possible at this particular point, considering some of the starting points that we had coming into this meeting?
This is an incredibly difficult task to undertake. The peace process has been pretty much moot since 2014. No real progress has been made. And since Jimmy Carter, every American president has tried to advance the cause of peace. We have tried very hard. The Israelis have tried very hard. And at times we've had partners on the Palestinian side, and at times we haven't. Problem is this. Aside from what's going on regionally, I have very little faith in this president, President Trump, to actually deliver on his promises. At one point, he said he's going to move the capital, or U.S. embassy, to Jerusalem. Seems like he's backtracked on that. The president has made many grand promises and that have turned out to be empty, and it's not something new. It seems to be a consistent. So you want
President Trump to take a hard line against the Palestinians? That's what you're saying.
Charles,
I'm asking you a question.
To be a consistent. I'm answering your question. Don't cut me off and let me finish my answer.
Listen. You're not going to come on the show and filibuster. There's another guest here. I'm simply saying, do you want President Trump to take a hard...
Well, don't invite me to your show if you're terrified of my answers. If you're terrified of getting an answer, I know you're not a foreign policy expert.
Nothing. If you were driving a semiconductor truck at 1,000 miles an hour, you couldn't find me.
I know you're not. Calm down. Calm down. I know you're not a foreign policy expert, so at least hear it from someone who knows a thing or two.
President Trump is negotiating. At least he's in the middle of a negotiation here. Now, Abbas is saying, hey, we want a Palestinian state. We want East Jerusalem to be the capital of that state. For so many people, for a lot of people, that's a non-starter.
Sure, everything President Mahmoud Abbas says is a non-starter. So he wants Israel to go back to the 67 lines. He wants Eastern Jerusalem, and he doesn't accept Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. So, in other words, he wants to flood the country with refugees. So the whole process is a non-starter.
Today, also, Hamas made some announcements, a new policy platform. Apparently, they said they've taken out some of the anti-Semitic language and that they've moved closer to accepting the creation of a Palestinian state, a two-state solution. Does that help in the process at all?
No, it's also a non-starter. First, they're saying whatever they're saying in English. The trick is, what are they saying in Arabic? And Hamas is dedicated to Israel's destruction and replacement with a Palestinian state. And Hamas is part of the Muslim Brotherhood.
I wanted to ask you one quick word because we're running a little late here. Is it possible? I mean, we're trying. Everyone wants this to work. Is it possible to reach a solution?
Charles, you having fun running a sham interview? This is, so if you want to just ask questions of someone you like, why do you invite another guest?
Peace. We actually have a solution. It's called the status quo.
You like what's happening right now?
Well, no, the status quo is the best that can be accomplished. And when someone comes up with a better idea than the status quo, I'm happy to listen. But I've never heard anyone come up with a better idea than the status quo.
The American-Israeli alliance has never been stronger. It's stronger than ever before under your leadership. And I look forward to working with you and your team to advance our common interests, security, prosperity, and peace with Israel's neighbors and for the region. And we can do it with you.
There's nothing I would rather do than see peace between Israel and the Palestinians. I think lots of good things are happening. It will take a little time, as you know. It's taken plenty of time, many decades, and nothing's happened. But a lot of good things are happening. Actually, by taking off the table the embassy moving to Jerusalem, that was always the primary ingredient as to why deals couldn't get done. Well, now that will also mean that Israel will have to do something that will be good for the other side. We're working on deals. I think that I really believe something will happen. They say it's the toughest of all deals. When they talk about tough deals, they always say Israel and the Palestinians. That's the toughest of all deals. It is a dream of mine to be able to get that done prior to the end of my first term. I don't want to do it in my second term. Well, that's a big chip that they got. I took probably the biggest chip off the table. And so obviously we have to start, we have to make a fair deal. We have to do something. Deals have to be good for both parties. Otherwise you don't have a deal and you don't have a lasting deal. So something will have to be done, but that's a very big chip. Israel got the first chip, and it's a big one. There's no question about it. I like two-state solution. Yeah, that's what I think. That's what I think works best. I don't even have to speak to anybody. That's my feeling. Now, you may have a different feeling. I don't think so, but I think two-state solution works best. I would say over the next 2 to 3 to 4 months, something like that. That would be the time that I'd like to at least release the plan. It is a very complex situation, but I think we have some brilliant ideas. Ideas that have never been thought of before, ideas that are good for both parties. And again, it has to be good for both parties. Okay?
Let's go now to Ramallah and speak with Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative, Mustafa Barghouti. And Mr. Barghouti, let me ask you, right now there's no dialogue between the Palestinian leadership and the Trump administration. They're gearing up to unveil their peace plan. What must they do in order for it to get some kind of serious consideration by the Palestinian leadership?
They have to retreat on what they have done. Moving back the embassy from Jerusalem. And they have to stop saying that Jerusalem is the unified capital of Israel and accept that Jerusalem should be shared by Palestinians and Israelis and accept the principles that of the peace talks so far that have been going on for a long time, which is that we are talking about two-state solution, which means an independent Palestinian state on 67 borders. None of that is happening. On the contrary, the American peace plan seems to be nothing but something that was dictated by Netanyahu's government to eliminate the possibility of peace based on two-state solution.
And Dr. Barghouti, what do you make of the decision by the US to release $61 million in aid to the Palestinian Authority for security purposes? Why is this actually happening now?
As you can see, the American administration has suspended all aid to Palestinian Authority except that portion which is for security apparatus. And that means they are supporting the security coordination between the Palestinian Authority and Israel. In my opinion, the Palestinian Authority should refuse that because you cannot cut aid from health, education, human work, social needs, and then just support security apparatus. This seems to be very ridiculous, especially in the light of the American suspension of $360 million that should support the health and educational and humanitarian needs of the Palestinian refugees. So I think what the Americans are saying is that all they care about is security coordination and a strong security apparatus of the Palestinian Authority, but they don't care about Palestinian health or education or social welfare. And that, in my opinion, is unacceptable.
Dr. Barghouti, I want to go back to something you just said that the U.S. has to acknowledge as part of this plan, the 1967 borders. I remind you that even the Obama administration did not, in the end, do that. They gave hints and then they retreated. The Trump administration says it's for the parties to negotiate what their borders are. So why should that be one of the Palestinian preconditions?
Well, there are no preconditions. The preconditions are coming from Israel and the United States. What we talk about is the international law and the UN resolutions, which have once again said that Palestinian state should be established on the occupied territories by Israel, and which were occupied in 1967. Those who are coming with preconditions are the United States administration and Mr. Netanyahu. They're saying that Jerusalem is off the table, the issue of refugees is off the table, settlements should continue and they are off the table, and there will be no Palestinian state, but clusters of Bantustans and cantons in about 224 small islands separated from each other by military checkpoints and settlements and a horrible wall. So instead of a state, they are creating an apartheid system. The preconditions are imposed from Israel, not from us.
And Dr. Barghouti.
The role of the United States in mediating the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is almost as old and as complex as the conflict itself. American presidents have tried, failed, and tried again to bring an end to the standoff. Last month, President Trump's team began rolling out the first part of its two-stage peace plan, the economic component, unveiled at a conference in Bahrain. The all-important political plan is yet to come. Jason Greenblatt is one of the men leading the U.S. effort, along with presidential son-in-law Jared Kushner. He is a former real estate lawyer for Mr. Trump turned negotiator, focused on some of the most prized and fraught land in the world. I spoke with him this morning. Jason Greenblatt, thank you very much for talking with us.
Thank you for having me.
So despite multiple efforts over the decades, there has not been a mutually agreed on peace plan in the Middle East since Jimmy Carter, the Camp David peace accords, Menachem Begum, Anwar Sadat. That was 40 years ago. What makes you believe that now is the time and the right moment for a peace plan that works?
I think we're at a unique time in history. We have a unique president who's not afraid to speak his mind. We have a region that actually wants to incorporate Israel into the neighborhood. I think people are tired of the conflict. I think everyone wants better lives for the Palestinians, but everyone is also willing to acknowledge the many, many challenges that exist to give them better lives, to improve everything.
You've divided this into an economic plan and a political plan. And as you know, some of the critics are already saying what you've simply done is swap the idea of land for peace with money for peace. How do you respond to that?
So we fully understand the Palestinians do not want an economic peace. They deserve much more than an economic peace. It's unrealistic to expect that an economic peace could have ever worked. But no matter how many times we say that, the manipulators, the people who want to undermine our efforts will just keep using that talking point. So I'll say very clearly, there is no economic peace without an acceptable political solution to both sides.
So at this point, Palestinian leaders have not only not expressed interest, they say they are actively against this. You've talked about it needing grassroots support. Who's going to lead that grassroots support? Can you name anyone in the Palestinian community who has come forward and said, I want to talk to you about this?
Unfortunately not. I meet countless Palestinians here in the region. They know I'm very active on Twitter, and no matter how great the meeting goes, and almost all of them are great, even if they're tough discussions about U.S. policy, they always plead with me when they leave, please do not tweet about our meeting, please do not tell who you met with. And I have to respect that. When they go home, they are afraid, and that's unfortunate.
What the critics say is that when you look at what this administration has done with regard to Israel, and I'm just going to tick off a few things, they say all the core demands of Israel's right wing have been implemented. U.S. aid to Palestine has been slashed, including U.S. support for the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees. Jerusalem declared as Israel's capital, Palestinian diplomatic missions closed in Washington, and U.S. missions closed in the West Bank and Gaza. So how do Palestinians see this as a time when the Trump administration is even willing to give them any benefit of the doubt?
When I speak to these ordinary Palestinians, I explain to them that they have to view these decisions through a United States lens, not through a peace process lens. Jerusalem, for example, was a law since 1995 that every presidential candidate promised to do, both recognize Jerusalem as the capital and move the embassy. Nobody actually followed through on that promise until President Trump. United Nations Relief, UNRWA, it's a broken system. It keeps Palestinians living in these refugee camps in a suffering condition with no possible future. So it's a bit unfair for the critics to say that because of those decisions we don't care about Palestinians.
What rights do you believe the Palestinians deserve to have?
The rights is a big word. I mean, I think our hope is to give Palestinians as great a life as the Israelis have, with everybody in the region being secure as possible.
I think Mr. Kushner has said that he supports Palestinian self-determination. What does that mean?
I don't want to get ahead of the plan. One of the decisions we made strategically is not to disclose any element of the plan, because then people will start attacking each element of the plan. But suffice it to say that in the roughly 60 pages of the plan, that question is answered, and our goal is to give the Palestinians everything possible with respect to that and anything else, so long as Israel's security is not affected in a negative way.
Is there still a possibility of a two-state solution here?
The reason we don't use that term is you can't take a conflict as complex as this and boil it down to those three words. So we've avoided the slogan, if you will, but the 60-page plan will address everything, including that question. And we've very carefully designed this plan to give everybody as much freedom as possible, but without compromising on security for anybody.
Let me come back to the Israelis. What responsibility do the Israelis bear for the current state of affairs in the Middle East?
I think that Israel is actually more the victim than the party that's responsible. From the moment of its formation, they were attacked multiple times. They continue to be attacked with terrorism. So I'm not sure I understand the premise of the question. I think that they're trying their best to succeed. They've actually succeeded in many ways, especially economically, under very, very trying circumstances.
So you don't see mistakes they've made, places where they've overstepped their authority? And so
Nobody's perfect, right? I can't think of single instances, but I think even our great country has made mistakes over the years. And over time, you try to correct those mistakes. But I think Israel is doing the best that it possibly can under very challenging circumstances.
As you know, Prime Minister Netanyahu has floated the idea of annexing the West Bank settlements. Is this something the United States could support?
I don't even like the word settlements. I think it's a pejorative term. I use the term neighborhoods and cities. But I'm not going to get into a political discussion. I don't do it with President Abbas when he talks about his talking points, 67 borders and all that. Let's wait till we show the political plan.
Some people do believe Israel is headed toward a one-state, a one-state.
I'm not sure that there are many people that think that a one-state is good for either side. Our plan does not contemplate one state. I think if it did, we would have released it over 2 years ago. But I think that one of the challenges of this file, as people speak about the West Bank, Judea and Samaria as being occupied, I would argue that the land is disputed. It needs to be resolved in the context of direct negotiations between the parties. Calling it occupied territory does not help resolve the conflict.
President Trump, how does he look on this peace process, how it's going so far?
I think he understands the reality and the complexity of the situation. He has great credibility among the Israeli public. He had, throughout 2017, strong credibility among Palestinians. Obviously, that's been eroded because of U.S. policy. But he has great credibility among all the leaders in the region other than the Palestinian leadership.
Senior advisor Jared Kushner is making his way through the Mideast this week. He's promoting economic portions of his Israeli-Palestinian peace plan during his 5-nation tour. Now, the Trump administration has called the framework the deal of the century, but few details have been released. For more on this now, I want to bring in Norman Rule. He's a former senior U.S. intelligence official, and he's with me now from Washington. So let us talk about what's been going on with Jared Kushner. What's the overall purpose of Jared Kushner visiting these Gulf nations right now?
Well, good morning. For approximately 2 years, Jared Kushner and Jason Greenblatt have conducted a series of informal consultations with regional partners as to what a peace deal would look like. Throughout these discussions, it's been consistent that there needs to be a robust economic package for Gaza and the West Bank. In order to fund that package, you're going to need money from the Gulf states, in particular Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and Qatar. This trip is important because it's going to line up that initial financial package. Now, the Gulf states are going to want to know what exactly they're funding, what exactly this brings to the Palestinians, and what significant concessions the Palestinians are going to need to make to Israel.
So listen, you know, when it was announced that Jared Kushner would be involved in this, would be spearheading finding a resolution when it comes to this sort of decades-old conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, I think a lot of people were scratching their heads. The president talked about his relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu, that Benjamin Netanyahu has known him since he was a little boy. But many people wondered, how does that qualify him for this job? It's been a little bit of time now. Does it look like he is qualified for this job? Is he a reliable negotiator?
Well, certainly after 2 years of having significant discussions with all the partners across the board, to include Europeans as well as American Middle East experts, it's clear that Jared Kushner and Jason Greenblatt know this issue as well as anyone could in that position. Obviously, he has the support of the president, and he has a close relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and that's important for any deal. However, we're at the point where, in order to achieve a deal, it is clear that there will be significant concessions from the Palestinians as well as the Israelis, and the Palestinians are unwilling to make these concessions, but they know they're pushing back against someone who has the support of President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Hanging over all of this is Washington's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Is that going to be a sticking point? Does that make this almost a non-starter?
Well, it's a complicating factor, and again, there are many who would have said that perhaps we should have asked for Israeli concessions before making this move. But looking back on the decision, a couple of points are important. First, it's already done. It's not going to be undone, and everyone recognizes this. Second, there was very little response from the Arab street on this issue. And there were many who would have predicted that such a deal would have provoked unrest, protest, and perhaps even violence. And that's been noted. This said, I think what we're really looking at is the perception, particularly in the Gulf, that in order to move forward, they've got to see concessions from Israel. Now, the Palestinian Prime Minister Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, has already let it be known that he is against this plan. He is against any further concessions. In part, he is about 83. He's at the end of his career, and I don't think he wants to be remembered for a legacy that included giving up more of Jerusalem or making significant concessions to Israel. So when you ask if the Jerusalem decision was important, I think it's most important in terms of how the Palestinians see this as an element of their way forward.
And so, you mentioned concessions on both sides. Have the Israelis indicated in any way that they're willing to offer up some type of concessions?
Well, again, I'm not privy to those conversations, but my understanding is that the Israelis recognize that there will need to be some territorial concessions, as well as some territorial gains. There's a lot of give and take here. I think when you're looking at the Israeli issue right now, you need to put this into perspective of their local politics. Israel is going through an election. In order to achieve victory, Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to have the strong support of the Israeli right. For that reason, I don't see this plan rolling out now until that election is completed and we can see where that government stands.
So I want to ask you about something just a little bit different. Jared Kushner is going to be visiting Saudi Arabia on this trip. There have been concerns about his relationship with the Saudis, particularly the Crown Prince. Some have felt that because his relationship is so tight with the Crown Prince, that the Crown Prince maybe perhaps felt emboldened, and as a result, we get the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Why is this trip significant when it comes to Kushner pushing his peace plan?
Well, thank you. It's a great question. Well, to begin, I want to state my personal view that the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, unjustified, grotesque, and terrible, inexcusable, merits the strongest possible punishment for those involved. And the Saudis have stated that they are likely going to seek the death penalty for at least 5 people, have removed the Crown Prince's 2 senior-most advisors, and will seek long prison terms for the rest of the individuals. I don't know if the relationship between the White House and the Crown Prince encouraged the Crown Prince to support at least a rendition, if not the actual murder. And there's a lot of talk about this, but frankly, it's from people who are generally against the Trump administration. My understanding is that the relationship between Jared Kushner and the Saudis is almost exclusively focused on Palestinian issues, and that non-Palestinian issues with the Saudis are handled by Secretary Pompeo.
Okay, very interesting. Norman Rule, thank you.
Solutions, but that he intends to deal with those at a later stage.
People are tired of the way that this has been stuck in the mud for so long, and what we're hoping we can do is get people to look at this a little bit differently, come together, share ideas, and then hopefully we can create a framework on which to move forward economically.
His proposal, set to be the focus of meetings in Manama this week between the U.S. and Arab Gulf states, includes $50 billion for economic projects, a West Bank Gaza corridor, and tourism in Palestine. But Palestinian officials, protesters, and West Bank residents are demanding a political solution, saying the biggest obstacles to peace are the problems the deal does not address. Naji Tamimi, who heads the village council for the West Bank town of Nabi Saleh, says he's distressed by a nearby illegal Israeli settlement.
They attack the local people and their properties. The army is always with them and carries out attacks on local Palestinians with them. Many times they've closed off the village, arrested people, conducted nighttime house raids, killed locals, and seized land.
Others are worried the money will further distance them from their rights and their land, like Abdul Karim al-Jabari, who lives in Wadi al-Hussein near Hebron. His village is surrounded by 3 Israeli settlements.
Settlers came to me and told me to ask for any amount I want and move anywhere I want in exchange for selling my land and my home.
He's one of many West Bank residents saying the only way they'll leave is on the way to their graves. Despite Kushner's confidence, his peace deal may end up stuck in the mud if it doesn't include a solution that enables Palestinians to stay put. Sarah Balter, TRT World.
What I told you, no one knows about, and you keep it that way. How I know you, I could cry or shout, you will listen either way. And I told you about the full breakdowns that are only mine to talk about. I even told you about the sacred grounds where I go when I need to shout. There is more to you than words can can say. You're the roof when I'm wet from rain. You know the core in every bit of pain. So I wanted to say that you'll see me rise. You've seen me crash and burn and fall overboard, and you'll be seeing me rise. You've given me more than I could ever afford. Swear you will see me rise. I will love you, I will have your back, as you always had mine. 'Cause I owe you, when the world's pitch black, you and I will stay entwined. And I told you about the full breakdowns that are only mine to talk about. I even told you about the sacred grounds, where I go when I need to shout. There is more to you than words can say. You're the roof when I'm wet from rain. You know the core in every bit of pain. So I wanted to say that you'll see me rise. You've seen me crash and burn and fall overboard, and you'll be seeing me rise. You've given me more than I could ever afford. Swear you will see me rise. I burn and I will rise. I burn and I will rise. I burn and I will rise. Swear you'll be seeing me rise. I burn and I will rise. I burn and I will rise. I burn and I will rise. You'll be seeing me rise. You've seen me crash and burn and fall overboard, and you'll be seeing me rise. You've given me more than I could ever afford. Swear you'll see me rise.